What if your desire to be good is the very thing that's keeping you from being whole? Carl Jung warned us, behind every act of goodness can hide a shadow. And sometimes the brightest people carry the darkest truths. We live in a world obsessed with goodness. Be kind, be selfless, be the bigger person. But Carl Jung, one of the most profound voices in psychology, believed that the relentless pursuit of goodness comes with a hidden cost. A cost we rarely see until it begins to destroy us from the inside. This isn't a feel-good message. It's a wake-up call. Because goodness, when used as armor, becomes a mask. And when we wear a mask for too long, we lose touch with who we really are. Jung knew that humans aren't just light. We are also shadow. And when we deny our shadow, when we exile the messy, aggressive, selfish parts of ourselves, we don't become better people. We become split. Half alive, and eventually resentful. This is the dark side of goodness. It's when kindness becomes people-pleasing, when empathy becomes self-erasure, when being nice becomes a way to avoid conflict, avoid guilt, avoid being seen as bad. But here's what no one tells you. The more you try to be good in every situation, the more likely you are to suppress your truth, and the more power you give to your unconscious shadow. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the parts of ourselves we deny, reject, or hide. Anger, pride, desire, jealousy, even ambition. And when we bury those parts under the label of bad, we don't eliminate them. We just drive them underground, into the subconscious, where they grow in power, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Think about it. How many times have you smiled through discomfort? Said yes when you meant no. Tried to save someone while quietly falling apart inside. That's the shadow of goodness, the part that seeks approval at the expense of authenticity. And Jung's warning was clear. If you don't confront your shadow consciously, it will run your life unconsciously, and you'll call it fate. So where does this start? Usually in childhood. We're praised for being good, for staying quiet, for helping others, for making things easier for adults. We learn that love and safety are given when we suppress our needs. Over time, we internalize this. To be good is to be accepted, and anything outside of that goodness must be dangerous. So we push it down, until the good child becomes the anxious adult, until the helper becomes the emotionally drained caretaker, until the kind soul starts to feel invisible. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And nowhere is that terror more alive than in the good person, because deep down, they feel something isn't whole. They've been taught that if they stop pleasing, they'll be rejected. If they stop performing, they'll be punished. If they speak their truth, they'll lose love. But Jung's work calls us into deeper courage, into integration. He didn't want us to stop being kind. He wanted us to be kind with awareness. He wanted us to be whole, not hollow. And to do that, we have to look at our shadow, not with judgment, but with curiosity. So what does the shadow of goodness actually look like in real life? It looks like rage that simmers beneath politeness. It looks like martyrdom masked as service. It looks like the person who never says no, but secretly resents everyone for it. It looks like burnout, emotional collapse, or sudden outbursts no one sees coming. Because when the shadow is denied, it leaks out through passive aggression, bitterness, self-sabotage, or a complete breakdown. You see, the danger isn't in being good. The danger is in being only good. In denying the complexity of your own humanity. Carl Jung believed that true freedom comes from integration, not perfection. From making the unconscious conscious. From seeing yourself not just as a light bringer, but also as someone capable of darkness, and choosing awareness over repression. That's where the healing begins. That's when your kindness becomes powerful, not performative. That's when your boundaries become clear, not cold. That's when your empathy is grounded, not exhausting. Because it's rooted in truth, in wholeness, in self-respect. So the next time you feel the urge to be the good one, pause. Ask yourself, am I being honest right now? Am I betraying myself to protect someone else's comfort? What part of me is asking to be seen, but I'm too afraid to show it? These are not easy questions, but they're necessary. Because pretending to be all light does not make you more lovable. It makes you fragmented, and fragmentation breeds suffering. Carl Jung didn't ask us to be saints. He asked us to be real, to hold the paradox. To recognize that even in your most generous moments, you carry unmet needs. Even in your silence, you carry rage. Even in your goodness, you carry shadow. And that's not failure, that's being human. Carl Jung once said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." That other self is the part we silence in order to be accepted. It's not evil, it's not corrupt. It's simply human. But when we deny it in favor of being good, we give birth to something Jung called the persona, a carefully crafted image we present to the world. A social mask, a performance of acceptability. The persona isn't necessarily fake, it's functional. We all wear one. It helps us navigate society. But problems begin when we believe the persona is all we are. When we invest so heavily in our image of being nice, agreeable, dependable, morally upright, that we forget who we are underneath. The persona becomes armor. And when you live behind armor long enough, you start to suffocate. You find yourself exhausted from smiling when you're not okay. You apologize for having needs. You tiptoe around honesty because you're afraid your truth will offend. You begin to mistrust your own instincts because they don't match the image you're trying so hard to uphold. That's the cost of being too good. You lose access to your truth. And when you lose your truth, everything becomes distorted. Your relationships, your sense of self, even your inner compass. You attract people who love your persona, not your soul. And that leaves you empty, even when you're surrounded. Jung warned about this. He said, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is." So you play the part. You say what people want to hear. You become the helper, the fixer, the one who never complains. And at first, people admire you for it. You're the reliable one, the strong one, the one everyone turns to. But inside, you're tired. Because your soul isn't here to be a performance, it's here to be lived. The truth is, we often weaponize goodness to keep ourselves emotionally safe. We think that if we're good enough, kind enough, patient enough, we won't be rejected, we won't be abandoned, we won't be hurt. But life doesn't work that way. You can bend over backwards for people and still not be enough for them. You can sacrifice your own needs and still be misunderstood. You can smile through heartbreak and still be met with silence. Why? Because love earned through self-abandonment isn't love. It's dependency. It's fear. It's a bargain that always leaves you feeling less than. Jung taught that the real journey of the soul begins when we turn inward, not to become better performers, but to become more whole. That means questioning the role of goodness in your life. Is it flowing from a place of integrity? Or is it a survival strategy? Are you truly being kind? Or are you just avoiding discomfort? These are hard questions. They require brutal self-honesty, and most people never ask them because the persona works, at least for a while. It gets you praise, applause, social approval. But over time, the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes unbearable. And that gap is where anxiety lies, where burnout breeds, where resentment festers. That's the shadow of goodness. It doesn't look like evil. It looks like smiling while you're dying inside. It looks like listening to everyone else's pain while ignoring your own. It looks like saying yes to everything and slowly disappearing from your own life. And no one notices, because you're so good at making it look effortless. But Carl Jung didn't want us to be effortless. He wanted us to be real. And that means acknowledging the rage beneath your patience, the grief beneath your smile, the boundaries beneath your silence. It means learning to say, "I matter too." The problem is, many of us were never taught that goodness can coexist with truth. We think if we set a boundary, we're being selfish. If we speak up, we're being rude. If we say no, we're letting someone down. But that's not truth. That's programming. Programming that says, if you're not pleasing others, you're failing. So we overextend, overcommit, overfunction. And then we quietly break. That's what happens when the persona becomes too heavy, when the shadow grows too loud, when the soul can no longer breathe behind the mask of goodness. But here's where Jung's brilliance really shines. He didn't say to destroy the persona. He said to integrate it, to become aware of the mask, and choose when, how, and why you wear it, to reclaim your choice. And that's where real power is born. When your kindness comes with truth, when your empathy includes yourself, when your goodness doesn't silence your soul, That's not selfish, that's sacred. Because goodness without awareness leads to martyrdom. But goodness rooted in truth leads to liberation. And liberation is messy. It means some people won't like the new you. It means some relationships will fall away. It means you might disappoint people who benefited from your silence. But that's the price of reclaiming your soul, of becoming whole, of stepping into a life that isn't about performance, but about presence. Carl Jung believed this is where the real journey begins, not in pretending to be good, but in becoming real. Owning your contradictions, facing your fears, learning to live from a place of integration, not imitation. That's when the mask drops, and the healing begins. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This wasn't just poetic psychology, it was a direct warning. Because when you spend your life trying to be the good one, you don't just hide your shadow, you start seeing it in everyone else. This is what Jung called projection, the unconscious act of attributing your own denied qualities onto others. So the anger you repress, you see it in others and call them toxic. The selfishness you never allow yourself to feel, you see it in others and call them narcissists. The desire for boundaries that you buried deep, you see it in others and call them cold or selfish. Why? Because when you exile a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It just moves into your external world. You start battling your own shadow, but through other people. And this is where relationships become a battlefield for your unconscious. If you're someone who prides yourself on always being there for others, always being the safe place, always giving more than you get, you might think you're the glue holding things together. But sometimes you're not helping, you're enabling. And other times, you're controlling. This is the shadow of goodness most people never want to face. The fact that your help can be a mask for your own unmet needs. That your giving can be a way to gain love. That your selflessness can be a form of control, because it keeps you indispensable. Jung would ask, what are you really afraid will happen if you stop being the good one? Will they leave? Will they love you less? Will you have to face your own emptiness? Because here's the truth. When you base your worth on being needed, you become addicted to dysfunction. You attract relationships where your identity is tied to your usefulness. You unconsciously seek out wounded people, not because you're cruel, but because being the healer gives you purpose. But underneath that purpose, there's fear. Fear of not being chosen. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of being forgotten if you're not fixing everything. And this is where goodness becomes a trap. You keep giving and giving and giving, hoping someone will finally see you, finally choose you, finally meet your needs. But that moment rarely comes, because you've taught people to only see the strong version of you, the silent version, the one who never asks for anything. And eventually, that becomes your prison. Carl Jung didn't pathologize this. He didn't say it makes you broken. He said it makes you human, because most of our shadow behaviors began as coping mechanisms, adaptive responses, survival strategies. But what once saved you now limits you, especially in love. You'll find yourself in unbalanced relationships where you're the caretaker, the emotional sponge and anchor. And at first, that might feel powerful. You feel needed, important, essential. But over time, it becomes draining, lonely, unfair, because you abandoned your truth to be loved. You've made yourself small so others could shine. And maybe you've even stayed silent in the face of mistreatment, because being the bigger person felt safer than being honest. But Carl Jung would ask, at what cost? Wholeness is not found in sacrificing yourself for others. It's found in confronting the part of you that believes you have to. So how does this show up? Sometimes it looks like being attracted to emotionally unavailable partners because you think your love can fix them. Sometimes it looks like avoiding conflict at all costs because you think disagreement equals rejection. Sometimes it looks like doing everything for everyone because you're terrified of being perceived as too much and you simply have needs. This is not goodness. This is abandonment of the self. And Jung's work teaches us that until we reclaim the parts of us we've buried, our anger, our desire, our assertiveness, our truth, we will continue to seek them through other people. We'll project them onto others. We'll resent others for expressing the very things we don't allow in ourselves. It's why the person who never says no is often the most resentful. It's why the most together person often carries the most silent pain. Because the more you perform goodness, the more you lose your capacity for intimacy. Real intimacy requires truth. It requires risk. It requires showing up as you are, not as the version of you that's easiest to love. And that can feel terrifying. Because what if they don't love the real you? But Jung's wisdom flips that fear. If they don't love the real you, you were never truly loved to begin with. So you must risk it. You must risk being honest. You must risk being misunderstood. You must risk being seen, not as perfect, but as whole. Because only in that space can real connection be born. Only in that space can love breathe. Only in that space can you rest. No more performing, no more rescuing, no more shrinking into a role. Just you, fully human, deeply flawed, and still worthy. That's what Jung meant when he said, "I'd rather be whole than good." Because goodness without truth is a lie. And wholeness, messy, raw, honest wholeness, is what your soul came here to embody. Not to be liked, not to be needed, but to be free. Carl Jung said something that strikes at the very heart of this journey. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the soul of shadow integration. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming whole by turning toward the parts of yourself you were taught to fear, hide, to reject. If you spent your life performing goodness, the idea of integrating your shadow might feel terrifying. It might feel like you're becoming bad or selfish or dangerous. But that's just your programming talking. Integration is not about becoming less moral or less loving. It's about becoming more honest, more rooted, more awake. Because when your goodness is no longer about fear or approval, it becomes real, conscious, free. So what does this process actually look like? Let's begin with a fundamental shift. 1. Stop labeling parts of yourself as bad. This is where most of us get stuck. We've been taught since childhood that certain feelings are wrong. Anger, that means you're ungrateful. Jealousy, that means you're petty. Assertiveness, that means you're aggressive. Desire, that means you're selfish. But these feelings are not problems. They are messages. Shadow work is about listening. That angry part of you, it's probably been pushed aside for years. It might be holding the key to your boundaries, your courage, your fire. That jealous part of you, it may be pointing to a hunger you've ignored, something your soul is still longing for. That selfish part, it might be trying to remind you that you deserve to exist without always giving everything away. Integration starts by sitting with these parts, not to shame them, but to understand them. To ask, what do you want me to know? And then listen. Really listen. Because when you make space for your shadow, you discover it was never trying to ruin your life. It was trying to save it. 2. Watch for your projections. Jung taught that projection is how the unconscious reveals itself. You can always find your shadow by looking at what triggers you in others. If you hate people who are arrogant, ask yourself what part of you has been forced to stay small. If you judge people who are too emotional, ask what part of you has been taught to stay numb. If you feel threatened by someone's confidence, ask, what would happen if you let yourself be that free? Here's a hard truth. Whatever you reject in others is often something you haven't made peace with in yourself. So instead of reacting, get curious. Ask, what is this reaction revealing about me? Not as a form of blame, but as a doorway into self-awareness. The shadow always reveals itself through discomfort. And the more honest you are about those discomforts, the more power you have to integrate them. 3. Reclaim your boundaries. Many good people struggle with this. They think boundaries are mean, or harsh, or unkind. But boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about creating space for truth. A boundary says, I see my value. I honor my energy. I'm willing to disappoint you in order to be in integrity with myself. That's not cruelty. That's maturity. If you grew up in environments where love was conditional, based on your performance, your silence, or your ability to please, then reclaiming your boundaries can feel like rebellion. But it's not rebellion. It's recovery. Carl Jung believed that healing isn't about eliminating conflict. It's about learning to live in alignment, and boundaries are how you protect that alignment. So ask yourself, where in my life am I giving more than I want to? Where am I staying silent out of fear? Where am I saying yes when my body is screaming no? These are invitations, not to become harder, but to become clearer. Boundaries are a love language to yourself. 4. Practice radical self-honesty. This one is hard, because the deeper you go into this work, the more you'll discover just how often you've betrayed yourself in the name of goodness. You'll see the conversations you avoided, the truths you watered down, the parts of you that you silenced just to be accepted. And you may feel grief. Grief for the years you wore a mask. Grief for the parts of you that were never allowed to live. Grief for the authenticity you traded for applause. But that grief is sacred. Let it come. Let it wash over you. Because grief is the gateway to truth. And truth is the beginning of wholeness. Jung said, we cannot change anything until we accept it. So start there. Accept the fact that your goodness was a survival tool, that it kept you safe, that it got you love, or at least the illusion of it. But now, you don't need performance. You need presence. And presence requires self-honesty, even when it's messy, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you relationships that only love your persona. And that's the price of freedom, and it's always worth it. 5. Let the integration process be slow. This isn't a weekend retreat. This is a lifelong practice. You don't just fight your shadow and move on. You live with it. You learn from it. You create with it. Jung believed the shadow was not just something to fix. It was a source of creativity, of depth, of transformation. Some of the most profound breakthroughs in life come not from your light, but from the moment you sit in the dark and say, even this belongs. Even the part of you that's angry. Even the part that's tired of being nice. Even the part that wants more. It all belongs. That's what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming your full self, not a perfect person, not an idealized self-image, but a whole integrated human, one who knows their light and has made peace with their shadow. By now, you can probably feel it. This journey isn't about giving up your goodness. It's about giving up your illusion of goodness and stepping into something deeper, something truer. Because when your kindness is no longer about fear, it becomes a force of freedom. When your love is no longer about people-pleasing, it becomes a gift, not a transaction. And when your presence is rooted in truth, not performance, you finally come home to yourself. Carl Jung didn't want you to be just good. He wanted you to be real. And in that realness, your soul can breathe. Carl Jung wasn't just speaking to individuals. He was speaking to the world. Because the shadow isn't just inside you. It's in your family, your society, your culture. It lives in systems and language and traditions passed down without question. And if we're serious about transformation, we can't stop with personal healing. We have to confront the collective shadow. Let's be brutally honest. Our world rewards performance. It rewards masks. It rewards those who play their part, follow the script, stay within the lines. We're taught from a young age to behave, to obey, to please, to fit in, to be polite instead of passionate, to smile instead of speak, to be agreeable even when our soul is screaming. And when someone breaks that pattern, when someone speaks up, sets a boundary, expresses anger, says no, they're labeled as difficult, aggressive, too much. This is not a coincidence. This is programming. A system that punishes wholeness and praises performance. Especially for those who were never allowed to take up space. Women, people of color, neurodivergent individuals, empaths, the sensitive, the intuitive. For these people, being good wasn't just a choice. It was often a matter of safety. But Carl Jung would challenge that safety. He would say, what you resist persists. And if a society resists truth, truth will come back louder. That's why we're seeing the rise of voices that don't fit the mold. Artists, creators, thought leaders, people who no longer want to be good, they want to be free. They're tired of pretending, tired of shrinking, tired of biting their tongue just to survive in a world that profits off their silence. And this is where Jung's work becomes dangerous in the best possible way. Because shadow integration doesn't just make you a better person. It makes you in control. It makes you honest in a world that thrives on denial. It makes you awake in a culture that prefers you numb. It makes you whole in a system that only benefits when you stay fragmented. That's why embracing your shadow is not just self-work. It's rebellion. Because in a society that wants you polished, smiling, compliant, your raw truth becomes a threat. Here's how it plays out. You stop apologizing for your needs. You realize that wanting rest, space, pleasure, solitude, depth, these aren't indulgences. They're birthrights. And every time you honor them, you're rewriting the script that says your value is in your productivity. You stop fixing everyone. You finally see that constantly rescuing others keeps them from their own growth. That your worth doesn't come from martyrdom. That saying no is a gift because it frees you and it empowers others to take responsibility for themselves. You stop fearing your anger. You learn to feel it, listen to it, express it in conscious, clear ways, not to destroy, but to draw lines in the sand where your soul says enough. Anger becomes sacred. It protects your boundaries, your body, your being. You stop chasing perfection. You let go of the mask. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You let yourself be messy, complex, human. And in that humanness, people finally see you. Not the polished surface, but the depth, the soul, the fire underneath. And here's what's wild. When you do this, when you stop performing goodness and start embodying wholeness, you give others permission to do the same. This is how the collective begins to heal. Not through ideology, but through embodiment. You don't need to change the whole system overnight. You just need to stop betraying yourself in the name of fitting into it. That's how you break the cycle. Because if goodness is only defined by what makes of it comfortable, then it's not goodness, it's submission. And Carl Jung would say, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your family expected, not who society wanted, not even who your wounded inner child thought they had to become in order to be loved, but who you actually are, fully expressed, fully present, fully alive. That is power. That is healing. And that is dangerous. Because a person who has met their shadow can no longer be manipulated by shame. They know who they are. They've faced their demons. They've sat in the dark with the parts of themselves others ran from. And now, they walk in the light with integrity. Not because they're flawless, but because they're whole. Let's pause for a moment. If this hits you deeply, if something inside you is shaking or stirring or rising up, it's not random. It's your shadow waking up. It's the part of you that's been waiting to be seen, felt, acknowledged. And you have a choice. You can ignore it. You can push it back down. You can keep wearing the mask of goodness, keep playing the role, keep making sure everyone else is okay. Or you can answer the call. You can meet yourself. Not just the polished version, but the real you. The one who gets angry. The one who gets tired. The one who wants more. The one who deserves to be free. So you've seen the shadow. You've sat with it, felt it, started to understand it. Now what? What happens when you start living from this new place, not to be good, but to be real? This is where the work leaves the page. This is where it stops being an idea and it becomes a way of moving through the world. Because here's the truth. The more integrated you become, the more your relationships, your conversations, your choices, everything starts to shift. You stop over-explaining yourself. That's one of the first signs that you're no longer addicted to being perceived as good. You stop trying to manage how others see you. You stop writing paragraphs to justify your no. You stop giving disclaimers for every truth you speak. Because when you're integrated, you know this: I'm not responsible for someone else's reaction to my boundary. I can be kind and still say no. I don't have to explain my worth. Carl Jung talked about the self, the archetype of wholeness, the part of you that is rooted, calm, conscious. When you operate from this place, there's no frantic need to be liked. You speak your truth and you let it stand. You realize that if someone misunderstands you, that's not a threat. That's just life. You begin to choose honesty over harmony. One of the deepest addictions of goodness is the addiction to harmony, to keeping the peace, to making sure everyone is okay, even if it costs you your own voice. But harmony built on silence isn't peace. It's self-erasure. So what does it look like to choose honesty instead? It means saying, I don't agree with that, even when it makes things awkward. It means sharing how something actually made you feel instead of pretending it was fine. It means confronting gently but firmly when something crosses the line. And yes, sometimes that honesty will disturb people. Sometimes it will end relationships that were only surviving on your silence. But that's okay, because truth clears the space for real connection. Jung taught that the goal of individuation wasn't comfort, it was authenticity. The capacity to be yourself without apology. When you embody that, you stop sacrificing truth for the illusion of peace, and you start building your life on what's real. You attract different kinds of relationships. When you stop performing goodness, your entire energetic field shifts. You stop attracting people who only love the compliant version of you. You stop tolerating dynamics where you give and give and give and still feel unseen. And you begin to draw in people who want the real you. The you who is complex. The you who has edges. The you who sometimes says no. That might mean fewer relationships, but the ones that remain will be deeper, more honest, more nourishing. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because once you do, you stop settling for relationships that only accept the fragments. You start creating, not to please, but to express. Maybe you're an artist, a writer, a teacher, a parent, a leader. Whatever your path, your expression changes when it's no longer driven by the need to be good. You create to reveal, not to impress. You speak to connect, not to perform. You let your voice come from the depth of your being, not the surface of your approval seeking." This is powerful, because when your creativity is no longer about being liked, it becomes liberating, and people can feel it. There's an energy in that kind of expression that resonates on a soul level. It's raw, it's real, it's magnetic, and inspires others to do the same. You begin to feel peace, but not the surface level peace of being approved of. This is something deeper. It's the quiet knowing I'm being true to myself. You may still be misunderstood. You may still ruffle feathers, but inside it's a rooted calm, because you're no longer abandoning yourself just to keep others comfortable. You don't need to fix everyone's mood. You don't need to explain your worth. You don't need to earn rest, love, or softness. You just exist, and that's enough. This is the peace of wholeness. It doesn't come from others liking you. It comes from finally liking yourself, your whole self, shadow and all. Let's get real. This path isn't always graceful. Sometimes you'll swing too far the other way, being blunt when you mean to be honest, setting harsh boundaries when soft ones would have worked, exploring parts of yourself that you're not quite ready to face. That's okay. Growth is messy. Shadow work is not a straight line, it's a spiral. You'll circle back to the same patterns with new awareness. You'll find deeper layers of yourself each time. You'll learn how to stand in your truth without needing to destroy anyone else in the process. And slowly, you'll become someone new. Not because you've added more layers, but because you've peeled them away. And what's left? Wholeness. Carl Jung believed that this kind of transformation wasn't just for you, it was for the world. Because the more people who wake up from the trance of performance and reclaim their real, raw, human self, the more the world becomes a place where truth is possible, where relationships are built on presence, not politeness, where leadership is rooted in authenticity, not control, where creativity flows from soul, not ego, and where goodness is no longer about perfection, it's about integration. So here we are. You've come through the fire. You've looked beneath the surface of goodness. You've faced the parts of yourself you once buried. You started walking through the world differently, more whole, more honest, more awake. And now it's time to ask, what does it all mean? Because Jung didn't do this work for drama. He didn't explore the unconscious to shock or impress. He did it because he believed something radical, that every human being has a responsibility to become themselves, fully, fiercely, without apology. And that means going through the underworld. That means facing not just the pain, but the power you were told to fear. The moment you realize that your anger has wisdom, that your sadness has depth, that your desires are not dangerous but divine, you're not just healing, you're becoming. This is what Jung called individuation. It's the slow, sacred, lifelong process of returning to yourself. Not the self your parents wanted. Not the self society demanded. Not the self you created just to be safe. but your essential self. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you integrate your shadow, the more light you carry. Not the performative light that pretends to be okay all the time, but real light. The kind that's rooted in truth. The kind that can sit with pain without flinching. The kind that can hold both joy and grief in the same breath. That's the light that changes things. That's the kind of presence that heals. Not because it's perfect, but because it's whole. And when people are around someone who is whole, they feel it. There's a gravity, a calm, a deep aliveness. You don't have to say much. You don't have to prove anything. Your very being tells the truth. That's what happens when you stop trying to be good and start allowing yourself to be true. You stop living from the mask. You stop chasing approval. You stop fearing your own death. And life opens up. It doesn't get easier, but it gets realer. You stop mistaking silence for peace. You stop calling people difficult when they speak their truth. You stop making yourself small just to keep the peace. You stand, rooted, clear, unshakable, because you know who you are, and you're no longer afraid to be that person, fully. That's the end game of this whole journey. Not a perfect life, not endless positivity, but wholeness. And with wholeness comes freedom. The freedom to rest, the freedom to say no, the freedom to feel deeply, the freedom to create without performing, the freedom to love without losing yourself. And that freedom, it's magnetic, it's dangerous, in the best way. It challenges everything the world tried to tame in you. And that's exactly what Jung wanted. He didn't want obedience. He didn't want people who simply conformed to niceness. He wanted individuals. Whole, awake, alive humans. People brave enough to meet the unconscious. People bold enough to claim their shadow. People willing to face the truth, even when it shatters everything they thought they knew. Because that truth, the one buried beneath years of conditioning, is sacred. And once you taste it, there's no going back. You can't unsee your own death. You can't unfeel your own power. You can't unknow the truth that your shadow was never the enemy. It was the doorway. So if you're watching this right now and something inside you feels a little shaken, a little stirred, a little woken up, good. That's your shadow. It's not here to haunt you. It's here to remind you, you were never meant to be just good. You were meant to be whole. And whole people, they change the world. Not by force, not by performance, but simply by being who they are, fully, fiercely, and without apology. So take this with you. Your darkness is not a flaw. Your fire is not too much. Your truth is not a threat. It's your power. Carl Jung knew that. And now, so do you.